I think it was about a 20% pass rate, and I just thought, this isn't where I'm at in life, and what I did possibly wasn't the best approach, and if I knew more back then, I wouldn't have done it. I would not have any friends on Strava. There's other markers that you can use opposed to, I'm running 5k now in 25 minutes. What's the best training method? What's the best nutrition method? It's the one that you can adhere to. If you can't have a conversation with someone whilst you're doing that easy run, you need to be running slow. Quite magical about just being able to put your trainers on and just being able to run.
Welcome back to the Adventure Athletes podcast, guys. In this week's episode, I sit down with Matt Jones from the Run Strong Academy, an online coaching business based around running. Now, recently we've been talking a lot about running, so instead of going into the ultra events and everything, I thought I'd take it back a step and talk about how to get into running and building up a strong base. So in this week's episode, we talk about getting started in running, building a strong and resilient body to try and prevent injuries as best we can, and comparing yourself to others and the negative effects that can have on your training. Now, talking about Adventure Athletes, we've just done a giveaway on our Instagram, so make sure you check us out on Instagram at Adventure Athletes, where we'll be giving away a £100 gift voucher, a bespoke plan, or a massage. So there's going to be 3 different winners, each winner getting a different prize. So that's over on our Instagram at the Adventure Athletes, and you can check us out on our website at www.adventureathletes.co.uk. But for now, enjoy the podcast.
So to start it off with then, I just wanted to ask about, what's your background with running? Like, what started you running? What's your history with it? Have you done any races? Things like that.
Yeah, so starting, I guess it was followed through from primary school and doing sports day, and enjoying the sprinting side. Anything above 200 metres in primary school was a no-go. Wasn't great at the longer distance stuff. Rolled that over into comprehensive, loved running, but anything under 200 metres was my go-to. Asked me to do cross country with the rest of the group, the rest of the school, and I was towards the back of the pile. So I knew I was fast twitch fibres, I knew I was a sprinter, under no illusions that longer distance just wasn't for me, and I just didn't enjoy it. But I've always loved the aspect of being able to run, and I find that I used to kind of link the running and speed thing, thinking that I loved the speed but I didn't love running, because when I went skiing and I was skiing down slopes and stuff for the school, I was like, this is great, the buzz you get from the speed. As I matured, ended up having knee surgery at 16 from a rugby tackle below the knee. That put me out for 8 months. Went back about obviously 17 years of age, did sports day, did well in the sprinting side, and then I just thought there was something missing. I love the speed, but not so much the running. So then, went through some hardships as we do as we get a bit older, and I started running sort of longer distances. When I say longer distances, I mean a kilometre, which I'm sure a lot of people can still relate to that now. I was doing sort of kilometre at a time because I was so used to doing the sprint stuff. I just wasn't built for anything above 200 metres. So a kilometre was hard work. I found that the sprinting was just a way of just going faster. That's what I thought in my brain at the time. Whereas I started running for a little bit longer, kilometre, 1500 metres, started to enjoy it, but I was one of those people that I was still trying to sprint a kilometre. I was still trying to sprint 1500 metres, which is no easy thing to do.
No, not at all.
And that wasn't helping me enjoy running more because nobody wants to get out the door and run a 1500 metres flat out, which is what I thought you had to do. So I think running for me was almost like, it's always been a bit of an escape. And as I got older, I started realising that the longer distance stuff mentally for me was just massive. It was the only thing really where I could clear my mind and have some kind of me time. Wasn't putting too much pressure on myself because I knew I was crap at it. And it was a way of just letting my mind kind of wander and really get through some sort of hardships when I was younger. Then further down the line, when I was early 20s, applied to go into Royal Marines. And anybody who knows the training, it's 32 weeks long. It's the hardest training in British military. So just to get in was a bit of a mission. A year-long application. I knew I had to get better at running longer distances. There was no good in me being good at 100 metres, 200 metres. They don't test that in the Marines or any military as far as I know. So I knew I had to get better at running longer distances. The main test which you have to get in is a 2.5k run or 2.4k run. You rest for a minute and then you have to do 2.4k in under 10 minutes, I think it was, which is fast. And that's just to get into the sort of test 3 days that you have to then get into recruit training. And I was just way behind the mark. I realised that, I was way behind. I was running sort of 2.4k in, less than 12 minutes, and that was a push for me. So it almost gave me that incentive that I needed to really develop the sort of aerobic capacity, really develop myself mentally more than anything, to run further than a kilometre or 1,500 metres. And I always think that a 2.4k is a really good starting point for a lot of people. And that was almost where I started.
Okay. Where did it go from there? So did you get through the testing?
Yeah, so I got through the PRMC, I got through the testing, which was a year-long application. So I got through the testing, passed all tests, medical, etc., which I was a bit on the fence with because of my knee surgery. But yeah, got through all that. Then you go up for like a 3-day PRMC, they call it. And it's essentially, you do all the fitness tests, you do that run, but not on a treadmill. You're obviously in the full whack. You're in the tiniest shorts in the world, a vest in the freezing cold, and trainers. And then so you do the beep test, push-up test, pull-up test, passed all that, and then they do the 2.4. You do the 2.4 in less than 12 minutes as a troop. You have a minute breather, and then you're asked to do it in less than 10 minutes. And passed those 3 days, which I was happy about, because I think it was about a 20% pass rate. So okay. there was a lot of people that didn't even pass the beep test. And the swim test as well. I better mention that because it is the Royal Navy after all. Those guys will hate me if I don't mention the swim. So I passed. I got into the Marines. Stayed there for 8 weeks. Long story short, my son had arrived, my firstborn, probably, I want to say 3 months before I decided to go in. So I knew going in was going to be mentally really difficult because I was going to probably be missing his first words, first steps. So I kind of had to make a decision while I was there. If I stayed in for a few more weeks, would have been contracted to stay in for 3 years. So I was a bit older than the majority of the guys there. I had more life experience. I was, early 20s, and I just made the decision to come out. No reason other than for my boy. We weren't able to get out on weekends. If there was a few of the troop that were naughty, should we say, our weekends were gone, so we'd have to stay there. We couldn't visit our family on weekends, and I just thought, this isn't where I'm at in life. I absolutely loved the training. I loved being with the boys in the troop, loved the discipline to it. Suited me down to the ground, being quite OCD with everything, and just loved the training. But again, there was something missing, and it was just a daily occurrence of being like, what's more important to me at this stage of my life? Not looking long term, looking at the here and now, which is something that I really tried to do better at in the last few years, especially, is sometimes looking at the here and now and not looking long term too much. So yeah, I came out after 8 weeks in Royal Marines recruit training. Don't regret going in one bit. Don't regret coming out one bit.
Yeah. So then, with the running side of things, that's obviously stayed with you, because that seems like it started as like a means to an end. You're doing it to get to this testing point, making sure you're fit enough, healthy enough to pass this test. What is it about running that's kept you doing it?
I've never been one to chase numbers, whether that's in the gym or out on the road. I think going into the Marines made me have to work towards those numbers. When I realised when I came out that I could actually run, 5K, and it would be enjoyable, and I wouldn't have to hit a 5K in less than 21 minutes, 20 minutes, I then kind of fell in love with running and what it did for me mentally. And that's still true to this day. I run for my mind, not for numbers or not anything. It's always good to set targets for numbers, obviously, and I do. But the main thing that keeps me going back for more and getting back out on the road, put my trainers on, is knowing how it's going to make me feel during it, and more importantly for me, knowing how it's going to make me feel after it. They say the runner's high, don't they? And yeah, it sticks with me every single week.
Fair enough. Have you taken it anywhere to have you done any big races? What's the furthest distance you've run? I'm a bit of a numbers geek. I feel like I'm the opposite to you. I don't feel like I've ever had the runner's high. As much as I run, I've never enjoyed it. But that's what keeps me going back to it, is I like the challenge of it. What's sort of the longest you've run? Have you done any races? And then what keeps you motivated other than just I enjoy it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are quite surprised when I give the answer to that, and I haven't done an event, whether that's a fitness-based event, whether that's a running-based event. I haven't done a single one. And that's just out of my own choice, really. It's falling back to that's never been why I run. I'm looking to do a couple of events next year. I said that last year as well about this year. But I think that the thing that stops me doing that is because I know why I run and I'm so passionate about it. It's just not something that I feel like I want to work towards right now.
Yeah.
So the furthest I've run, when we were in Marines recruit training, we were doing marathons, in boots and in cold, wet, soggy clothes. We were doing marathons in boots, and we'd be out, all day doing a bunch of stuff. We never had watches, we never had heart rate monitors, so we wouldn't have a clue what distance we were doing, but we knew they were like marathons, Officially, if we're talking Strava, I actually decided, I turned 33 in October, and I just decided in the weeks up to it that I needed to set myself a bit of a challenge. So I did 33k for turning 33 on my birthday. So that is probably officially the longest I've ran in 7-8 years since I've left the Marines, and the longest I've run on record, so to speak.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because everyone else that I've had on that's spoken about running is they're I want to see how fast I can go. I want to see how much I can push my body and get to this distance target and see how far I can push that. And then to have someone else come on and be yeah, I don't really run for distance. I don't do any events. I just run for me. It's really refreshing, to be honest. It's quite a different view from what I've got as well. Everything I do is, how far can I push this?
Yeah.
And it's not always how far can I train to push this. The first time I did a ultra marathon, my training for that was I did the Cardiff half marathon, and I didn't train for that. So I just turned up, did the Cardiff half, gave it a couple of months, ran an ultra marathon, and it was just there was nothing enjoyable about the experience. And that's what I enjoy about it, which sounds crazy to a lot of people, but I feel like your approach is going to be a lot more relatable to more people. So going into that then, how can most people get enjoyment out of running? Like I said, it's not something I enjoy, but I'm also saying that I like the discomfort of it. So for an average person that maybe has tried running before, had a bad experience because they were trying to push it too much, maybe too unfit to do the distances they were trying, how could you get them from sitting around not doing a lot to being able to run a 5k?
Yeah, so I think it lends itself to enjoyment. It always have and it always will, whether that's running or, weight training, whether it's kayaking, surfing, rock climbing. I think it lends to itself in enjoyment in part way, and if you don't enjoy something, you're not going to carry on doing it. It's all well and good doing Cardiff Half Marathon, but if you didn't enjoy it or enjoy a part of it, there's not going to be something that keeps you going back to that run. So yeah, for me, it all lends itself to enjoyment, and I think people start with too much too soon. They put too much pressure on themselves. They upload it to Strava. They connect with all their mates on Strava. Realize that their friends are running a lot faster than them and over longer distances. When in reality, we all have to start from somewhere. So I think people just tend to do too much too soon, and they usually don't enjoy it because they feel bad at it. And like I've said with my experience, not being able to do a kilometre without feeling like my lungs were going to explode, I didn't enjoy that. But there was something in that kilometre run that kept me going back for more, and that was just the mental clarity that I had from it. Yes, I wanted to see how far my body could push itself through that, and knowing that overcoming something that is hard, it's only going to improve you as a person, whether that's mentally or physically. There's going to be improvements there. So yeah, I think from an enjoyment perspective, that's key. You need to find something that you enjoy. And if someone isn't or doesn't enjoy running, I do feel that they're probably doing too much too soon or putting too much pressure on themselves.
Yeah.
That's what I find. When people come to me or they reach out saying, I hate running, I'm like, you don't hate running, you hate how it makes you feel. You probably haven't gone in there with the right mindset and the right approach.
Yeah.
I think having that there is, it's imperative when you first start.
Yeah. So with these people, essentially they're like creating a barrier from themselves. For what it sounds like is they're putting too much pressure on themselves, either with speed or with the distance. And I know I kind of went through it when I broke my ankle, when I was having to recover. Before that, I could just run forever. Wouldn't make a difference to me. And then after it, I had to, like, my specific rehab I was told to do was couch to 5k.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, 5k is easy. And then I went out and I did, like, I couldn't do 1k like you were saying. Like, that was a struggle for me. And that was the first time I felt it. So for me, I could feel that pressure on myself of, I feel like I should be able to run faster and run further. So if someone comes to you with these barriers, how do you break them down? Like, what's the actions these people can do to break it down? Because for me, it's quite hard to remove that pressure from myself.
Yeah, I think it's getting into a bit of a routine, and focusing almost on not what the outcome is, but what's in front of you. So the kind of walk, run approach I deal with a lot, especially when people come to me. For one-to-one coaching or in my academy, and they say to me, look, I want to be a runner, or I want to be able to run 5k, but I can't do it. And again, they've just tried to probably run 5k. They haven't thought about it methodically, which it's not their job to really, is it? And you see all these things on social media. Couch to 5k is great. It's a great place to start, by the way. But I do feel that with a walk run method, you're going to be able to get out there, get into a bit of a habit and a routine of just getting out the door and having some fresh air, letting the fresh air hit you. Whether it's summertime or whether it's pouring with rain, I think it's just good to get out there, get some fresh air, go for a bit of a walk, develop into a really sort of low tempo jog. Then if you're starting to feel the effects of it and you start to feel like your brain's like, I'm not enjoying this, then develop into a walk and just try and increase those small run-in periods to longer time. What I would also say to that is, I think people that are new to running or that want to get into running, I think it's going to be a lot more beneficial to them to almost see running as a time-based thing rather than a distance-based thing. It stops you comparing it to Kev down the road on Strava who's doing like 17-minute 5Ks. It also it helps because for me the value and the experience in running is being able to run for a longer period of time continuously, whether that is for 10 minutes or whether that's for, an hour or whether that's for 10 hours. To be able to run without stopping, I think is the biggest value in running you can have, regardless of what pace you're running at. There's something quite magical about just being able to put your trainers on and just being able to run without stopping, like Forrest Gump. So for me, I think retraining our minds to time over distance, I think, is a really good place to start as well.
Yeah, I think there's something that's like a lot of people won't realise is when it says, like, when you look at people starting out running and they're like, oh yeah, I've just like gone for a run, I might run a 5k, a 10k, especially people starting out that don't they're not competitive, they're not trying to be the fastest runners ever, and they might have just done like their first marathon, and you look at them and be like, oh, how could they do that? They don't realise that for the majority of people, they're not running the whole time. There's like a lot of walking involved.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I love about ultras, and what's like keeping me sucked into ultras is the fact that you can stop.
Yeah.
And you can just sit around and eat for like 10 minutes, and then you get back up when you feel good, and you can walk a bit if you want, you can run, and you don't really determine that either, like the course determines it.
Of course.
It could be the weather, you might be running through a bog and it's like, I can't run as fast as I can through this. So then you're just like treading carefully like round these trails and stuff, and I think that's what I love about it. And I think that's where I'm starting to see more enjoyment out of it. But I think that trails sort of forces that upon you, whereas I think with road running, which I absolutely hate with a passion, you can just get sucked into, this is the pace I have to hit this goal and hit this distance for this amount of time. Like everyone that signs up for a marathon, in their head they've got a time goal they want to do, and with like the events as well, they sort of force it upon you, like not in an intentional way. They've got to make sure everyone gets a sort of time that they want, so they put you in these pens.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, if you think you're gonna, like when you sign up, if you think you're gonna hit this time, sign up for this group. And it's like automatically you're thinking, oh, what time should I be running it in?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's something very, very valuable that a lot of people don't realise. You can walk.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think there's, again, there's magic in the experience of being able to, I hate comparing it to a gym class because I love gym classes, but if you're running and unless you do run with a consistent partner or a group, you're going to be spending a lot of time on the trails or out on the road by yourself. Like, don't beat yourself up. If you need to get into a walk, get into a walk. Like, there's no rules. Like, don't stress over yourself. Strava isn't gonna like message you and be like, yo, what are you doing? Like, you're running slower this week than last week. There's no rules, and I think unless you're training for something specifically, and I have coached and I do coach people for events that are looking for a specific time, and then you have to be a bit more methodical with the planning and the prep and the consistency of it. If you're just looking to get out there and just get better at running, there's no need to put all that pressure on yourself. There's other markers that you can use, opposed to, I'm running 5k now in 25 minutes opposed to 27 minutes. Look at your heart rate. Look at what your heart rate's doing if you've got a monitor, or even more accurately, judge it by how you feel and how you feel about the overall experience. I think that's the biggest tell that you're getting better at running, is not so much that it's feeling easier, but it's just feeling better. You're feeling nicer, like parts of the run or certain runs just feel good, and sometimes they just click.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. With like people getting into it then, what other aspects of their lives do you get them to look at? Because when you get into like any fitness endeavour, it's more than just that thing. Like, doing the thing is good, and it's a big step for a lot of people, but then I feel like it affects lots of other aspects of your life, whether you intend it to or not. What other aspects do you look at around running?
Yeah, so I think There's almost, say, three main components that I look at with people away aside from running. I think being the fact that, you know, it's what my experience is in, what my whole sort of business is catered around is the strength and conditioning element. I think stronger bodies are better bodies and faster bodies. And for those that are looking, you know, to hit certain times, then they're going to be interested by the fact that strength and conditioning is probably going to make them faster. What I also get them to look at is from a nutrition front, because, you know, when we're running or adding in running to someone's routine and they haven't had much of it in the past, there's a lot of fatigue going on there. You know, there's more calories being burned through a continuous exercise such as running than there would be for most other exercise. So I think nutrition plays a huge part in recovery, and more importantly for most, just the performance is how they feel day to day, and, you know, how they're performing on those runs. And then, you know, I hate to be that person, but sleep. I used to be a terrible sleeper, and going into the Marines certainly didn't help with that, getting 3 hours every night after, you know, 7-8 hours of training. And I brought that when I came out. You know, I used to regularly get 4 to 5 hours, start coaching at 6 a.m, finish at 2, train for 2 hours, and then maybe go back into work then for another few hours, and I'd be up at the crack of dawn. So I think I've been that person where sleep has been at the back of my mind and thought, I'm better than this, you know, it's not affecting me. Just because I get 5 to 6 hours, like, I'm still performing, I'm still able to function. Whereas, you know, I look back and that wasn't optimal me in all manners of life. I was able to function in my job and do a pretty good job. I was training well and efficiently, but then aside from that, you know, my personal life was not optimal. And I definitely put that down to sleep.
Yeah.
And I think when we're creating more stress and more fatigue through the running, you're going to need more sleep. Sleep is the foundation to absolutely everything, whether that is performance, recovery, energy levels, appetite, injury risk, you know, the list goes on, and everything is linked to sleep.
Yeah. Taking it back to the strength and conditioning side, this is something I'm very keen to dig into, because everyone gives the advice, like, if you're running, you need to do some sort of strength training, but they never go into anything more than that. That seems to be just the advice. Do some strength training.
Yeah.
What should runners do? Like, where do they start? Someone that's maybe let's go with someone that's been running kind of regularly. They want to just make sure their body's strong enough to keep being able to run. It's a longevity thing, not a performance thing. How would you go about introducing strength training to their sessions?
Yeah, so in the academy, we do everything from home. So you certainly don't need to go to a gym and pump iron, for sure. And I think the main aspect that runners get from, you know, running is that endurance aspect, and the fact that their runs are usually feel relatively hard. And I'm sure we'd go into why not every run should feel hard further down the line. But I think for most runners, they go out on the road and they hit the road, and running is hard work. Running's continuous and you're not getting any rest. So I think a lot of people believe that's what should happen in the weights room as well. You know, that's what should happen on the resistance training. They feel like they should be in the gym for about an hour, you know, training, back squatting, doing heavy deadlifts, doing everything and anything. And usually the typical lower body sessions that runners gravitate to, because we use our legs to run. We also use our arms to run. We also use our core to run. So I think you want to see it as a whole entity. You know, you want to see it really as a full body strengthening, you know, foundation. And I think if people were looking to start, there's nothing wrong with just starting body weight from home. There really isn't. That's going to give you a solid base to work from. Improve your mobility, because you're going through the range of movements, you know, with a squat, maybe a press up, some form of pull if you've got something available in the hip hinge. I think you're going to get a lot from just incorporating those exercises, especially when you haven't done before. Running is very one-dimensional. You know, runners don't tend to do any lateral movement, any jumping, unless you're doing like a steeplechase. So I think being able to train in a different manner is also going to help improve, and reduce your chance of injuries. It's the research and studies, everything out there suggests that having a stronger body makes us less likely to injure ourselves. Especially with a sport like running, you're never going to be able to prevent injury. It's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's inevitable because it's an impact-based sport, as a lot of other sports are. You're never going to be able to prevent injuries. What you can do is you can build a stronger base to work from, so you are less likely to injure yourself or injure yourself seriously. What you're also doing by incorporating strength and conditioning into your running is you're allowing your body to recover more efficiently from injuries. I take myself as an example. The Christmas before last, fractured my ankle. I was in a moon boot for I want to say 3 months. Couldn't drive anywhere over Christmas, which was a nightmare. And if I didn't have a solid strength and conditioning base, like I didn't have when I did my knee at 16, it would have taken me double the length to recover and get back out on the road. But 3 months after it, I was back out running. And I put that down to not my determination or sheer will. I put it down to the strength and conditioning I was doing for years before that happened, and also still training and still developing strength, in a moon boot, because I could still do upper body stuff, I could still do core-based stuff, I could still do stuff on my right leg. And that's all foundational because the body works as one unit.
Yeah.
So I think, to go back to it, the strength and conditioning component really does have a lot of different pros to add to running. But again, the same with running, people put too much pressure on themselves because they feel like they need to, buy a gym membership and spend hours on end, spend like 4 to 5 hours in a gym every week.
Yeah.
Whereas, what we've got set up in the business is 2 30-minute strength sessions every single week. That's an hour. Everybody's got an hour spare in their week, if they are a runner, to add in strength training.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of the issues are maybe not directly coming from like social media, but like from just the perception of others in comparison, mostly, is seeing like, and I think social media just sort of acts as a magnifying glass to it. It's like you see all these people online that are like, oh, I've went from not running to running a marathon in 6 months, and I'm now beating my 5k PB by this much, and my strength training looks like this, and it's heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, lots of single leg work. And then everyone's looking at that and being like, if I want to be a runner or be considered a runner, that's what I have to do, is I have to run like 6 days a week while strength training 3 days a week, while also managing life and work and potentially having kids and a social life. And I think that's the side that you don't see from all these other people, is some of them, that might be their job. Their job is running. So they've got all the time to do that and still have everything else going on. But I don't feel like a lot of people can achieve that.
Yeah, and if you can't adhere to something, what's the best training method, what's the best nutrition method, it's the one that you can adhere to. So it needs to be practical for you, and spending 3 to 4 hours in the gym every week alongside most people's running, which is their main thing, is just not practical. It needs to fit into your lifestyle, and I think that's a really good point that you've made there, is it becomes so unachievable for so many people, so they just decide not to do it because the pressure is to spend that amount of time in the gym every single week.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I've always had a bit of a odd relationship with strength training because, I've been a runner for quite a few years, and I've always been into the conditioning, the cardio side more than the strength. So the conditioning over the strength. So I've always had a bit of an odd relationship with it because I understand, and I've always understood the benefits, to health and our bodies and injury risk to strength training as a whole. But what it didn't filter in for me was anything performance related, because as we spoke about, I've never searched for, 10 rep maxes, 1 rep maxes. I've never really worried too much about how much I can lift off the ground or put on my shoulders and squat with. So for me, it was almost like I was just strength training because I knew I needed to. now that I'm running a lot and looking ahead and really trying to push my running, but still at the back of my mind know that I do it mentally. Strength training for me is now an easier flip to switch because I know it benefits my running.
Yeah. Are there any sort of like go-to exercises that you'd give runners? Like, what if you could pick 5 exercises that you'd give to runners of any level? It could be absolute beginner, or it could be someone that runs 4 or 5 days a week already. What would those 5 exercises be?
Yeah, it's a common question, isn't it? I think it's anybody who can answer that with the same answer as me. It's absolute magic. But I do think that there's definitely some foundation exercises that people can do from a bodyweight perspective as well. So to make it applicable to everyone, whether they've got weights or whether they haven't got weights. And I think that's where we need to start. So from a single leg exercise, for me, a step up is like, it's always been the king of single leg exercises because it's the most functional one. How many times are we going up the stairs a day? How many times are we going up a set of steps? How much time in a day do we spend on one leg when we're walking? And running is obviously it's a unilateral sport. Like you run on one leg. You don't sort of hop like a kangaroo when you're running. So for me, a step up will always be the most efficient exercise that runners can implement into their strength and conditioning routine, or just their weekly routine. Then obviously we need to strengthen the posterior chain, as well as the front of our body. So as far as the posterior chain is concerned, I would always say, again, a single leg glute bridge is going to be, foundational, because a lot of people can butcher and will butcher a deadlift from home, a Romanian deadlift. So I think a single leg glute bridge is going to be great because it's gonna get that posterior chain working. Also going to strengthen our glutes, and you can do it, from home with no equipment whatsoever. So yeah, step up, single leg glute bridge. We run with our core. Our core again is foundational to anything, and you could pick a number of core exercises. But again, I like a dead bug. A dead bug again is research and studies and everything, and my own experience working with people. People get a lot from a dead bug because it's more about the control of the movement over how fast you're doing and how many reps you can do. When you're running, you really want to be able to control and sort of, stabilize that core, which is going to keep your posture nice and upright as well, and save your lower back. So for me, a dead bug as a core exercise would be foundational. And then you'd have to finish with a push and a pull. A push could be a press up variation on a box or up against the wall. If you can do a full press up, then on the floor. What I would try and avoid with that is doing kneeling press ups, because you're not bringing your core into it. Bang for your buck, you want to be doing a straight press up, so you're incorporating your core as well. And then a pull exercise, which we all know that a pull exercise from home with no equipment is near enough impossible. Unless you've got a chin-up bar and a pull-up bar, and not many people are efficient at chin-ups and pull-ups. So I would definitely advise getting a band or a TRX and doing some form of banded row or a TRX row, for example.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that is like so hard to train at home.
So hard.
I'm fortunate, like behind me here, I've got a home gym. I've got everything you can imagine, and then downstairs I've got hangboards because I'm into climbing, so I can do pull-ups on my hangboards. I can hang rings up, so I can do dips, TRX based stuff. I've got like squat rack and a separate bench press. I've got like back extensions, everything you can need. So I'm fortunate enough that I can do anything that I want here. But so many people, like, from like my programming point of view, is I'll try writing programs, and then you always have to ask what equipment they've got, but I especially have to because I forget that people don't have a home gym like me. And I'm like, oh yeah, they can't just do like max deadlifts. I have to think of something else for them to do. And I think posterior chain in general, just anything backside of the body, is really difficult to load at home. So yeah, trying to find ways to do it. And like you said, resistance bands or TRXs, 2 massive things that are really inexpensive.
Yeah.
That are going to give you like a whole host of exercises that you couldn't do without them.
Yeah.
So one thing I did want to ask on the strength and conditioning side is, just because I've seen like mixed opinions on this, is it worth doing calf raises for strength and conditioning for running? Because there's the argument of like, oh yeah, like you're using your calves, you're running, you're pushing through your toes constantly, you need to be able to do it. But then there's the argument of you're already doing it from running, why would you do more of it? It's not going to be useful, because you're not going to do like 500 calf raises at home.
Yeah. As with most things, it depends. And again, I hate to be that person, but it really does depend.
It's all right. We had Kerry on, and that is all she said. That was her whole podcast. Was every question? Oh, it depends. And it's like, thanks, Kerry.
It's true. Anybody who knows what they're talking about from a coaching perspective knows that it's relative to the individual. That's what makes a good coach understand that it's never black and white. Something beneficial for someone is not going to be beneficial for another person. So yeah, it really does depend on what their training experience has been, whether they've played team sports. Myself personally, I don't do calf raises, and I don't do any calf raises with the academy. That's not to say that I won't start doing them, but I feel for most people it's not going to be beneficial, and your time could be best spent elsewhere. If a one-to-one coaching client came to me and said, look, I'm having these issues, my ankles are shot and it's a regular occurrence, or whether their calf is cramping up, for example, or loads of other sort of mini little niggles, then that's definitely something that we'd look at, and I have looked at in the past. But in my experience, bang for buck, when we're just looking at bringing in strength and conditioning, I feel like calf raises should definitely not be in the top 5.
What about working the opposing muscle, then the anterior tib? Tib lifts, same sort of answer?
Yeah, exactly the same answer. It depends on whether they're struggling with anything in particular. Ultras like you do, I'm sure is going to be a different kettle of fish, because your foot's on uneven ground, isn't it? So you're putting a lot more pressure on the sort of tib and everything to do with the foot and the ankle especially, which filters into the calf. That would probably be a different kettle of fish if you're doing that consistently, for sure. But with most of the people I work with, and for myself who are predominantly running on roads, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. I think it's just another thing, taking it back to social media, with knees over toes guys just massively popularizing his training style of like, you have to do Nordics, you have to do knees over toe lunges, you have to do tib lifts. If you don't do those 3 things and you're a runner, then you're going to get injured. And it's not really true. Like, I love his training style, don't get me wrong. I love those exercises. I use them a lot myself, but saying that it's like the be all and end all, really good marketing, but not really good training.
Yeah, I think, social media loves controversy, doesn't it? And someone who's putting something out there that hasn't necessarily been said before is going to get a lot more traction than me saying, yeah, you probably just need to squat, hinge, work your core and do some push and pull, which is the foundation, and that's what's going to help. But then if someone came and said, this is what you need to do, to be a faster runner, and it's some exercise that we haven't necessarily seen much of, people are going to be like, okay, well, I haven't done that, and I haven't seen many people doing that, so maybe I'll try that. People are searching for that magic solution, when in reality, the basics work, and they will always work because they have always worked.
Yeah. It's almost like you said, it's almost people are searching for that little magic pill that's going to fix all of their problems. And really, all it is just consistency over time.
Yeah.
That's what it will come down to. And I think, yeah, with going back to those specific exercises I mentioned, I think running just covers a lot of that anyway. Like, you're going to have your quads and your hamstrings worked from the action of running. You're going to be working your calves and your tib, again, just from that consistent repetition of running, like, is basically doing a single leg jump over and over and over for however long you're running for.
Yeah, and we're using our calves a lot more throughout the day than we are our quads and our hamstrings. So like you just said, they're loaded a lot more day-to-day life. So we don't necessarily need to train them specifically unless we're in a bodybuilding show,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
So taking it like the inverse of what we was just talking about, so we sort of went down the route of how do you get a runner into strength and conditioning training? How would you do the opposite and get someone that's already like fit and strong? Maybe they've done bodybuilding or powerlifting, some form of weight training for an amount of time, and they're looking to introduce running. How would you go about doing that?
I'd use the same approach where we start from the basics, and we start from a walk run method. I think that's a no-brainer unless they've run anything more than 200 meters before. And for a lot of people, if they come from more of a strength and conditioning background and they haven't done much running, but maybe they've played team sports in the past, for example, they're going to have done sprints. They're going to have done stuff like that, which I can completely relate to because it's where I came from. And what I did possibly wasn't the best approach, and if I knew more back then, I wouldn't have done it in the way of just being able to get out the door and run for a kilometre straight, flat out, and see how far I could run. Now that I've got a bit more knowledge and experience in me, I for sure would have started myself off slower, because like you just mentioned with that dreaded word consistency, there's no point in getting out the door and going for a run, but then you've run so hard that you've injured yourself, or you're creating loads of fatigue and you feel like you've been hit by a bus the next day, because you're not going to be able, or you're going to be less likely to want to go for a run 2 days later. So you need to factor in all these things, aside from the strength training that may be fatiguing you a little bit as well, and understand that both will fatigue your muscles, and there's no point in going to the gym and hitting it hard and then going for a run the next day and hitting it hard, because you're not allowing your body to recover.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me it would just be following a couch to 5k type method, but again I would also try and reframe their mind to run for time as opposed to distance.
Yeah.
Which in my opinion is something that couch to 5k may not necessarily do as well as I want it to.
Yeah. I feel like it's just sort of a product of races, essentially. There's like the shortest race that you really do is going to be a 5k. That's the popular one.
Park
is
run.
A 5k. Yeah, park run. And then you've got all of the other events, and they're always distance. It's never like you're trying to do who can run for an hour. Like there's starting to be like backyard ultras. Again, they still measure it by distance of like, here's a set loop, who can do the most amount of loops. But essentially that's a time one, who can keep running for the most amount of time. So I feel like all of that just comes from the products of racing, and I feel like that's what gets a lot of people into running in the first place, is racing. They've seen these events, they want to be part of this event, which is great. But I think you're the first person I've spoken to that's really highlighted that downfall of, like we don't want to be looking at distance, you want to be looking at time if you're just doing it for yourself. Because everyone always is like, I want to run a 5k. Like that's the first thing I hear from anyone that's looking into running, is 5k or higher. Like it's never, I want to run a mile. I'd never heard that ever. No. It's 5k, which is quite a distance, to be fair.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that, again, if the thought of a park run or the thought of a 10k race gets someone into running that wasn't necessarily running previously and they enjoy it, then like, I'm not saying that's not the way to go. If that gets more people running, then that's great. But all I'm saying is, if people want to keep up with their running and keep the consistency there, and more importantly for me, and what I preach is they want to be able to enjoy it. And for me, if we're just being able to get out there and run continuously for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, I think there's more power in that mentally, to the fact that our body can do that, as opposed to I can run a 10k, because then you're comparing yourself to the person next to you. You're comparing yourself to other people in that 10k race, which is motivation for some people, but not all people.
Yeah. I definitely think I fall into that category of that would motivate me, is the fact that I do compare myself to others a lot, but
We all do.
I also feel like that's not my only motivation, because when I've done races, I get a lot from looking at other people and being like, I'm going to catch up with them. I don't want them to beat me.
Mm-hmm.
And that pushes me harder on the day. But then that never sticks with me. Like, say I have seen someone, I usually just pick random people as well. I'll just be like, oh, they've got something distinct about them that I could recognise them in a crowd.
Red hat.
Yeah, something like that, a red hat. And I'll be like, I want to beat the guy in the red hat. And like throughout the race, I noticed it when I did my ultra, there was always someone overtaking me, and I'll be like, right, I'm not having that, I'm going to beat them. And it'd be a bit of a back and forth for a while, and eventually I'd be the one that drops off, because they're just running for themselves, and I'm like trying to race them, and they're like, what are you doing? So it helps me push further for myself. But then that never sticks with me afterwards. I don't finish the event and be like, oh, I can't believe the guy in the red hat beat me. It's always like, oh, I feel like I could have done better. Or it might even be like, I want to do that again, but get a better time.
Yeah.
And it's never... Like, I think some people would get caught up and be like, I can't believe that person beat me. And they're looking at other people's Strava stats, especially in a big event, say it's like the Cardiff Half.
Yeah.
If you know other people that have done it, you're going to be looking at their time being like, oh, how are they faster than me? Like, whereas like, yeah, for me, I've never had that. Like, I've looked at other people's times and I've been like, wow, that is incredible. And I've never been annoyed at them or myself for them being better than me. But I feel like a lot of people get stuck in that trap. How would you sort of avoid that if they are doing events?
I would not have any friends on Strava. I would delete everybody off Strava.
Get rid of all social media.
Yeah, that doesn't go for my clients. By the way, they have to have me on Strava because I need to look at their runs. But yeah, genuinely not having people on Strava can be a huge plus on that side. If you do feel like you're constantly looking at other people's times and not your own, or you're comparing your time to someone else's, whereas in reality, you want to be looking at the time you did a few weeks ago, or the time you did in your last event, compared to the time you've just done now or on the next event.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with trying to beat that previous time. There's nothing wrong with chasing running PBs, for sure. I think it's what keeps most of us going back to running, as well as it's such an accessible sport that you don't need to, you could go on holiday and you can still run, which is why, again, one of the reasons why I love it. So I think eliminating that comparison is genuinely rule number one. I think that's the most important thing, is eliminating that comparison and understanding that you want to be running for you and no one else. So why are you looking at other people's times? Why are you looking at other people's times and comparing them to what you've just done? And rule number two would just be to, again, reframe the mind and focus on being present in the run. And I'm not holistic in any sense or manner, but I do feel like being present in the run and just understanding that you're actually running and you're able to run when a lot of people can't, I think always helps mentally when the going gets tough, when you're on a run and it starts feeling like crap.
Yeah. You're probably going to hate this question.
Oh, no.
On the basis of everything we've just spoke about how you shouldn't be going for distances and comparing yourself and everything. And you can tell me to just like get lost with this question if you want, but I'm just really curious. For someone that's not run before, I feel like they would set themselves the different targets of 5k, 10k, half marathon, marathon. What do you think is a realistic sort of time frame for them to prepare for an event? So say they've like literally couch to 5k and then 5k to 10k, the half marathon. What's like a reasonable time frame for someone to give themselves to get ready for that?
For like a half marathon, let's say, from like 5k to a half marathon,
Yeah.
or from nothing to a half marathon.
Let's go like from nothing, let's do it in all the steps. So nothing to 5k, 5k to 10, 10 to half, half to full. Like, what's a reasonable? So then they could get the full picture of like, I want to do a marathon. These are the steps I have to go through. This is realistic. How long it takes? Because I know when I first signed up for events, it was like, yeah, I'll give myself a couple of weeks.
Yeah. And I think that's when we're at risk to, having niggles and creating injuries because of the fatigue we're putting on ourselves. It really depends on how much time the person is willing to put into their running, and the strength and conditioning and everything that goes with it on the side, because there's no point in just going out there and running if you haven't done any running before, without doing the recovery, without doing the strength and conditioning, which is, again, going to create a stronger and more robust body so it can run over the further distances. So I think going from 0 to a 5k, I think 12 weeks is always a good start, because it stops you putting less pressure on yourself. Yes, you can do it in less than that. Yes, some people will take longer than that, but 12 weeks, when it comes to anything, if we're looking from a 0 to 5k, a 5k to 10k, a 10k to a half marathon, or a half marathon to a marathon, I think 12 weeks is a really good time frame, because you learn a lot about yourself. If you're following a specific plan and you're consistent with it, I think you can achieve so much more in 12 weeks than people think they can. And they probably think they can achieve more in 6 weeks than they think they will. Because then they're forced to speed things up. They're forced to increase mileage in a higher amount. Whereas, again, the research and studies show that you shouldn't be increasing your mileage by any more than 10% every week for optimal performance and to help with reducing injury risk. 10% is a good rule of thumb. You're not going to go from 0 to 10k in 4 weeks by increasing the mileage by 10%. It's not the best approach if you're looking for that longevity behind running and being able to run or race an event that is also going to be mildly enjoyable. And I say mildly enjoyable because everybody's going to push themselves on an event. That's what they're for most people. So you're always going to have that extra in the tank. That's what you're training for. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with setting yourself, a time that you feel is practical to head towards. But in your training for it, I would definitely suggest, looking at the sort of time that you're running for rather than the overall distance.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. I think 12 weeks, and even subconsciously, I think a lot of coaches know that 12 weeks is sort of the good program mark. I think that's a sort of time frame that's easy to commit to, is saying, I want to do this and I'm going to do it for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
I think anything longer than that and people start to be like, oh, that's too much of commitment. But then, like you were saying, anything less and you're opening up to injuries and all of that side of things. And it sort of made me think about, I heard this on a podcast, funnily enough, is people overestimate what they can do in a day but underestimate what they can do in a year. And I think that can apply for any sort of time frame. It could be it's always going to be overestimate what you do in a day. You've always got like a long to-do list. At the start of the day, you're like, I'm going to tick all these things off. And then you get halfway through the day and you're like, I'm not halfway through that list. But then you move it to a week and it's like, actually, if I spread that throughout the week, it's more achievable. And then like take it to a month and then a year. And then like in 5 years, like what I think of that I could achieve in 5 years is probably like way easier than what I could actually achieve if I stick to something consistently. I think it always comes back to that consistency of doing something.
And again, I think giving yourself less time to, whether that's improve your business or improve your running or, improve your footballing ability, I think 12 weeks lets you have room for just normal and typical life that gets in the way. Whether that's bereavements, whether that's social events, whether that's little niggles and injuries you've got here and there. Whereas, if you do it over, say, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you're giving yourself less room to maneuver things efficiently, and then in turn you're creating more pressure to be put on yourself with all the other pressure of life that you've got on top of that. So I just think it's a good and practical timescale for a lot of people.
Yeah. Would training look very different between, like, if you had two clients come to you, one of them's looking to get into running and the other one's looking to maybe up their distance from like a half marathon to a marathon, would like the basics of the training, because like obviously the specificity of it, yeah, that would change like drastically, even if you get two people with the same goal. But like the basics behind their training planning, would that be very different between those two sort of people?
For the strength and conditioning element, they'd be very similar. Which is what we do with our clients. They're follow along sessions. They're not specific strength workouts to that individual, because a lot of runners, they just need to do the basics. So the strength and conditioning side would be near enough exactly the same, unless they're dealing with any serious imbalances or injuries, surgeries. From a running sense, yeah, that would be a lot different, because it depends on what their running base is at currently. It depends what mileage they're doing at currently before we start programming for them. And it depends on training history as well. What has their body been through previously to warrant us, developing the mileage appropriately. That's where it, in my opinion, should be more individualized, because everybody's going to need a different starting point from a running perspective. If people are looking to PB a half marathon, then you're going to be working with paces more. Whereas if someone just wants to get out there and start running, you're going to be working with time-based more, because if they just want to improve their running, they just want to run for longer. Even if they come to me and say, Matt, I just want to be faster, what they're actually saying and what they're actually going to get more benefit from is being able to run for longer, and then those shorter distances that they're doing, miraculously they're going to be faster, because you're training your body to build that aerobic base to be able to run for longer. So yeah, a long way around answer, but as always it does depend, but the running specifics would be very different.
Yeah. And then if you had like your perfect client, they've got all the time in the world to train, they're just looking to train to be healthier, they're not looking for a specific time or a specific event, they just want to be able to like run for longer and run at a slightly faster pace, what would their ideal week of training look like?
And again, if they're already running, 2-3 times a week, because let's say that's probably the average that most runners are running, I wouldn't be tempted to develop that, especially in the early stages. I think two or three runs a week is a really good benchmark, and then again 2 or 3 strength and conditioning sessions. Everything else is going to be a bonus. Whether you're implementing off the feet conditioning, so we're building that aerobic base, but away from the impact of running, such as getting on the bike or doing a class that isn't going to bring 1k runs or 200 meter runs into it. Off the feet conditioning, I think, would be definitely my first go-to around the strength and conditioning element and the running. But for me, it all hovers around the fact 2 to 3 runs a week, 2 to 3 gym sessions a week. Make that fit your week, make that fit your lifestyle, and you're on to a winner. And for most people, if we look at it from that manner, that's probably max 4 hours a week.
Yeah.
And when we think about your average gym goer, they probably spend more time than 4 hours a week when we look at the travelling they're doing to get to the gym, the travelling they're doing to get back, the time they're spending in the gym, the time they may be sitting on the sofa debating whether they're gonna get to the gym. So I think if we set the foundations, and I do regularly, I say, look, 4 hours a week is probably where the sweet spot is, and that includes everything you need: running, strength and conditioning, maybe some 10 to 15 minute recovery, mobility here and there if you're really struggling. That's a really good foundation for me.
And what would those like 2 to 3 runs look like? Would you just get them going out doing maybe like a walk run, or just setting a time and they just do that? Or would there be more specific goals within those sessions?
Again, a good rule of thumb is, 80%. It's the 80-20 rule in the running realm, isn't it? It's 80% of your run should feel easy, 20% should feel relatively hard. So 2 of those runs you want to be easy based runs. Whether that is time or whether that is distance based, is relative to that individual. But what I really like as a foundation run is just a 30 to 40 minute easy run. And the best way to understand that it's an easy run is either by looking at your heart rate if you're wearing a fitness watch or a heart rate strap. But the best way of making sure that run feels easy is, does it feel easy? Using that RPE scale of a scale of 1 to 10, you want to be hovering around a 4 or 5 out of 10. If you can't have a conversation with someone whilst you're doing that easy run, you need to be running slower. That for me is that's always the first run I put in somebody's program, regardless of what their goal is. So that for me is almost like the foundational run. And then for most people it benefits to have a longer run on the weekend. And again, you want that longer run to feel easy. And then if we're putting that third run in, you're probably looking at a higher intensity run. So that's when you bring in, an interval-based run, which I think suits most people, because from a time management perspective, intervals is great. And everybody likes to run fast. And I can completely relate to that from where I started my running journey. Everybody likes to run fast. So I think bringing intervals in there, is scientifically, intervals are incredible to near enough everything to do with, running, strength, power, the clarity side. But for me, as a form of variety and a form of enjoyment alongside those easy runs, I think intervals in the middle of that week is bang on where we want it to be.
Yeah, amazing. So thinking about everything we spoke about today and all of your past life experience, what is the one biggest piece of advice you would give to the listeners?
Don't believe anything you see on the news or on social media. No, but going off that, I think, and I've been so guilty of this in the past, and this just came to me now. This isn't prepped at all. Don't want to sound like a philosopher, because I'm not. But yeah, I think, and going off the theme of what we've had today, I think everybody is too quick to compare themselves to their neighbour, to their friend, to their family member, to their arch nemesis. That I think it's good to get so involved with what you're doing, and just you, and try not to focus on what other people are doing, and do stuff for you. I think that's something that I've been working on a lot, especially over the last few years, is whether that's business-based, running-based, strength-based, try not to look too far ahead of the chain, try not to look too far ahead of you, because I think there's immense value in seeing where you are now and seeing where you could possibly be in 4 weeks' time, 8 weeks' time, 12 weeks' time. Also looking at where you are now and looking at where you were 12 weeks ago, where you were 2 years ago, 4 years ago. I think there's huge value in understanding how far we've come, individually, rather than looking at how far we've got to go.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on. You've just started recently is it like a running club online sort of thing?
Yeah, so I call it an academy because I love the educational side, aside from the coaching and the obvious running and strength and conditioning coaching. I love the educational side. I love being able to educate people. So I called it Run Strong Academy for that reason, because I see it as almost like an academy for people to go to that want to become stronger runners, but also want to get more educated, whether that's on the nutrition front, the lifestyle front, or the running front.
Yeah. So Run Strong Academy, is that what it's called on all of your socials?
Yeah, so my business, which is Run Strong Academy, is on Instagram, mainly is at Run Strong Academy.
Yeah, and then where can people find you online if they want to find out more?
My personal handle, which is my personal training handle, is at @MattJones_PT.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on, and yeah, look forward to releasing this one.
Thanks for having me, mate. Great
No
chat.
worries.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adventure Athletes podcast. If you like this episode, make sure you follow us on Instagram, Spotify and YouTube, and share our content around. It helps more than you can ever imagine. Now, if there's a person in particular that you want to hear from, or a topic that you want us to cover, just drop us a message, let us know in our DMs, and we'll make sure we try and reach out to the relevant people to cover that topic for you. We're always trying to make content that you guys want to listen to. We have just dropped our website. It's adventureathletes.co.uk, and you can go on there to find out the range of different services we offer. So we have sports massage, different training programs, and personal training, both online and in person, that you can sign up to on the website. So make sure you go and check us out at adventureathletes.co.uk.